The horror genre is by far my favorite. I love scary games, I love scary movies. It's just my bread and butter. It's what I enjoy the most. Now, growing up in the early 2000s playing video games, a lot of those horror games came from PlayStation 2 or the GameCube, but eventually in 2005, with the launch of the Xbox 360, one of my favorite horror games would be coming out with it, and that would be Condemned: Criminal Origins. Now, Condemned: Criminal Origins is a 2005 first-person action and survival horror game made specifically for the Xbox 360 and Windows. This game was developed by Monolith Productions, published by Sega, and of course it was an Xbox 360 launch title. The game tells the story of Ethan Thomas, an agent with the FBI's serial crime unit in the fictional city of Metro. There's been a surge of serial killings and assaults that are perpetrated by various vagrants, and Thomas is pretty much convinced that those two things are connected. He starts hunting after this killer that's called the Matchmaker, and ultimately he's framed for the murder, and unfortunately his whole life gets pretty much twisted upside down in this journey, in this story that pretty much ends up going a lot further than he would even anticipate. Now, Condemned's designers wanted to create a game that was focused on a new game mechanic or kind of build on a mechanic that has already existed, and that was pretty much what they ran with. First-person shooters aren't new to the game, especially at this time. It wasn't something new. They wanted to build a simple but robust combat system. The designers ultimately utilized the Xbox 360 to create a realistic and unsettling environment with a heavy focus on visceral and violent close quarters combat. Now, of course, there are two main components to the gameplay in Condemned: Criminal Origins. You pretty much got combat and then investigating crime scenes. The game's combat is built primarily around melee. You do get firearms, but they're pretty uncommon in the first game. Players are able to acquire melee weapons from the surroundings in their environments. They might just be laying out in the open, or you might be able to pull a pipe off of the wall or snap off a 2x4. Now, each weapon has its own combination of damage, speed, range, blocking. So for an example, an axe might have higher damage and range than a pipe, but the pipe may have higher speed and blocking. There's two classes of melee weapon: debris weapons and entry tools. Now, debris weapons are pretty much, they have no other function other than just beating the shit out of someone. But entry tools can be used in combat, maybe like an axe. Like, you can use the axe to chop someone down, but you can also use it to chop down some doors. Or a crowbar can maybe open a safe, but you can also open someone's head with it. Now, blocking is a pretty big part of the game, especially because you can only really take a few hits, so you have to really get good at parrying, but just really utilizing the block mechanic in general. A successful block will momentarily knock an enemy off of balance, giving you, the player, a chance to counterattack. Another component of the game's melee combat is you have the ability to perform something called a finishing move, which I'm sure you never heard of that before. Pretty much you damage the opponent enough to where they get on their knees, and you're able to use a headbutt, a neck break, a punch, or you can even just slam their head into the ground or the wall. If you don't want to use your fist, or you don't have any melee weapon, you can even utilize the quick kick mechanic that they have in this game, which is pretty much just a little kick to kind of separate the distance from you and that enemy. Now, when using a firearm, the player cannot collect additional ammo. They're pretty much unreloadable, so whatever weapon, whatever firearm you pick up, whatever ammo it has in it, that's pretty much it. So you really have to utilize them sparingly and really make those shots count. The players can use like the butt of the firearm as a melee weapon. However, unlike other melee combat weapons, firearms will break when used repeatedly. Now, you also have a taser, which can be used temporarily to stun a target. The other primary game mechanic of Condemned: Criminal Origins is the forensic crime scene investigating. So pretty much when you get to a certain little area, it might advise you to use a specific tool to find and record evidence. When the player encounters an instinct area, the game will alert them to the presence of evidence. Pressing the tool button will automatically deploy the correct detection tool needed to locate the evidence. Once the evidence has been located, pressing the tool button again will automatically ready the necessary collection tool. Now, once collected, the evidence is automatically sent back to the lab. Detection tools include a UV light, a laser light, a spectrometer, and collection tools include a sampler, a 3D scanner, and a digital camera. You're going to be collecting evidence like fingerprints, footprints, residues, blood splatter, that kind of thing. So while Condemned Criminal Origins did have a pretty interesting story and really fun gameplay in my opinion, I think what really stood out for it was just so it felt so immersive and atmospheric. The detail to the environments, really just the sound effects and the lighting, I feel like it really just makes you feel like you're in this universe. It's really dark, it's really dirty and gritty, it's just kind of gross to be in. And then whenever you add the fun and violent and just really satisfying visceral combat, it just wraps itself up in a nice little package. Now, Condemned Criminal Origins actually performed really well. It sold really well. It came out with the launch of the Xbox 360, so of course it kind of just naturally sold pretty well. So we had to get a Condemned 2, right? Now, Condemned 2 Bloodshot came out in 2008 for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. It was developed by Monolith Productions again and published by Sega as well. And of course, it is the sequel to Condemned Criminal Origins. Now, with the actual release of Condemned Criminal Origins, they were actually intending on this entire game series to be this big universe where they were going to release like 3 or 4 games, even a movie. They were really about to dive into this series. Unfortunately, we didn't get that, but we'll get to that later. Set 11 months after the events of the first game, FBI agent Ethan Thomas has become a violent, prone alcoholic, plagued by hallucinations. As violence continues throughout the city of Metro, Thomas's former colleague Rosa elicits his reluctant assistance in tracking down the missing Malcolm Van Horn. Learning that Van Horn, aka Serial Killer X, may still be alive, Thomas soon finds himself at the center of a vast conspiracy, and he must do all that he can to evade the powerful cult who want him dead at any cost. So in making Condemned 2, Monolith closely looked at the reception of the first game, and they focused on what was really popular amongst the fans and critics and what was not. And with this in mind, they specifically set out to correct the 2 most frequently criticized elements of the original: forensic tools and the lack of depth in the melee mechanics. At the same time, they attempted to enhance and expand upon every other aspect of the original, from the graphics to the cutscenes to the AI, just the overall gameplay and mechanics. They also really hoped to take the story to unexpected directions by making Thomas a much darker figure and really fleshing him out than the previous title. So of course, just like Criminal Origins, this gameplay is primarily built around melee. There are some firearms, but they're still pretty uncommon, but they are definitely more prevalent than the first game. So you pretty much have the same thing going on with this game like in the first one, where you can take firearms from your enemies, you can take melee combat weapons from them, you can take them from the environment, you can pick them up. They have different stats like damage and speed, but in this one there are 3 classes of melee weapon: light, heavy, and exotic. So light weapons are fast and weak, but they include things like pipes and 2x4s. Heavy weapons are slow and strong like sledgehammers and baseball bats. And then the exotic weapons are pretty level specific, so you might get exploding dolls whenever you're in a specific level in the game. The melee combat differs from the system used in the previous game in a couple different ways. We get a little bit more variety, so we get things like bottles and bricks. Unlike in the first game, all melee combat weapons will eventually break though after repeated use. And there's also things like environmental kills, so you might be able to shove an enemy's head into a TV or a sparked wall, or set them on fire, impale them, or throw them off a balcony. Another significant difference is whenever you're fighting with a weapon or your bare fist, the players are able to chain attacks together and achieve combos. To perform a chain attack, the player's chain meter must be full, and if so, a chain attack can be initiated at any time. Combos can be performed at any time and require a specific sequence of attack types, but if the player takes damage mid-combo, the combo resets and it must be restarted. So there are firearms in this second game, but in this one you're actually able to reload your current magazine and you're able to pick up additional ammo. Of course, you can use the butt of a firearm just like in the first game, and there is a taser as well, but it's still just like kind of in the background. It's really there for minimal damage and just kind of to help you separate yourself while you can get something else. Initially, the player can only carry one weapon, whether it's firearm or melee, but later in the game, a holster can be unlocked, and that allows the player to wield a melee weapon and keep a handgun as a backup weapon. As the game progresses as well, the holster can be upgraded to hold larger weaponry. And there's a new little component to the firearm combat, which is the addition of iron sights aiming. But you have to be careful because when you use the iron sight, the gun actually starts to shake, and that's pretty much tied to the main character's, Ethan Thomas's, alcoholism, and that can only be countered by drinking alcohol, which is found throughout each level. The other primary game mechanic to Condemned 2 Bloodshot, of course, again, is forensic investigation. This has been significantly overhauled since the first game. Once the player has been alerted that they're in a study area, they must select the appropriate tool to record and collect evidence, just like in the first one. Upon doing so, the player is presented with multiple statements about that evidence, and they must pick answers to communicate to Rosa back in the lab. For example, the player might need to determine if a wound is an entry or an exit wound, or whether a body crawled or was dragged. Picking the correct statements often reveals additional backstory in dialogue and counts towards the level ranking that you get at the end of the mission. This ultimately unlocks upgrades such as brass knuckles, body armor, and even a holster. Available in the single player of Condemned 2 Bloodshot, we actually get something called Bloodshot Fight Club, and it's pretty much like they just drop you into arenas and you have to fight off a bunch of waves of opponents. There's also a multiplayer that they put into the game, and this supports up to 8 players, and there's 4 different game modes like Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, Bum Rush, and Crime Scene. So Condemned 2 Bloodshot was received pretty well, just like the first game. It had that thick, dreadful atmosphere, that visceral, violent combat, and I think the enhancements of the graphics and the physics really just enhanced the feeling of the combat in the game overall. So you may ask yourself, if these 2 games are received pretty well, then how come there's no 3rd game or 4th game or 5th game? And that's simply just because Condemned 2 Bloodshot really didn't sell that great. I mean, this game came out in March 11th of 2008, and I believe GTA 4 came out in April of 2008. I mean, this game was coming out with a lot of heavy hitters, and you guys gotta remember too that this came out in a time when the multiplayer scene was really starting to get going. I mean, every game really needed a multiplayer mode, and this game really didn't have a good one. Like, sure, you may have played it, you may have enjoyed it just like me, but really think about it. Did you ever go home or you're at school and you're like, hey bro, guys, you have to hop on Condemned 2 Bloodshot when you get home? You didn't, you know what I mean? You were gonna play Halo or Call of Duty or Gears of War or GTA 4. Like, there's so much other, like, more fleshed out multiplayer games that you would rather play. I know that the designer of the game, I believe it was, he said that he really hopes an indie development team would be willing to and wants to take over the series, and he would love if they did that and kind of breathe new life into it. But until then, we just have to appreciate the 2 games that we got in the Condemned series.